The land is full of witches. They abound in all places. They have on their bodies diverse strange marks, at which the devil sucks their blood.
The malice of witches is so great, their practices devilish. If we do not convict them, they will in a short time overrun the land.
Between 1550 and 1630, Britain was in the grasp of a witch-hunting craze. All over the country, hundreds of women, many of them old and weak, were accused of being witches. If they were found guilty, the penalty was death, by hanging or burning. It was a strange, dark time in Britain's history. Fear and suspicion stalked the land. But what was really going on? Were the victims really the agents of the devil? Or were they scapegoats? Innocent people blamed for things that weren't their fault.
It's a question of interpretation.
This is Pendle Hill in Lancashire. Nearly 400 years ago, 10 people from this area were hung after a famous trial in which they confessed to being witches. You can see several reminders of the event in the area today. In fact, the people here use the story to bring in the tourists. In doing so, they present a familiar, traditional image of witchcraft. Old crones with hooked noses, women who'd sold their soul to the devil in exchange for magical powers. Nowadays it's not meant to frighten, it's just for a laugh. But back then, people didn't think witchcraft was funny. They believed in it. They believed in the devil as much as they believed in God.
Back in 1612, England was a reformed nation. That meant the church had reformed itself. It had gone back to basics. It had stripped away all the rituals, the bells and smells of the old church. And what emerged was pretty hard line.
People believed that good and evil were in constant battle throughout the land. The devil was everywhere, trying to tempt people away from God. He could assume many forms, in animal shape, in human shape. You had to stay on your guard. Reading records of the Pendle witch trials, it seems that one of the accused, old Demdike, wasn't careful enough.
She confesseth that about 20 years ago she was coming home from begging. She met a spirit or a devil in the shape of a boy, who said to her that if she would give him her soul, she should have anything she wanted.
The word that sticks out here is confesseth. She confesseth she met a spirit, which means
she admits it.
And she wasn't the only one. Anne Chattox was another woman from Pendle, over 80, blind like old Demdike. And she too admitted to being a witch.
Anne Chattox says that about 14 years ago she was seduced into that devilish, abominable profession of witchcraft. Soon after which the devil appeared to her.
Old Demdike and Anne Chattox were put on trial with 8 other members of their families. All of them were found guilty and hanged.
Is it possible they really were witches? Or thought they were? Maybe. Such people exist even today. You talk to the people in Witches Galore. There's no doubt witches exist.
People come into the shop and they will tell me that they are witches. They fall into two very distinct categories. There are the group that are labelled white witches, and they're very quiet, very gentle people. The other group, well, I think they're evil people. They come along with all the, they're wanting black candles, daggers, funny symbols and signs, and they're the sort of frightening ones that I think would get witchcraft a bad name.
So, interpretation 1. These women really were witches. And at a time when the church was on the lookout for the devil's work, they got what was coming to them. But maybe that's not the whole story.
What follows is the account of Reginald Scott, an Elizabethan gentleman, describing how some old woman might find herself accused.
The old woman goes from door to door for a jug of milk, without which she would go hungry. Sometimes she is ignored, because in the course of time, the old woman has become tedious to her neighbours. So, sometimes, she curses one, and in time this neighbour falls sick, or his cattle dies, and he assumes it is the witch's revenge.
Going from door to door begging for milk.
Hardly sounds like an agent of the devil to me.
According to Scott, these old women weren't really witches. They were scapegoats, blamed by neighbours who felt guilty for letting them down. He sensed the Elizabethan world he lived in was becoming a less friendly place. The old cosy structures of village life breaking down. Neighbour turning against neighbour. And that's why accusations of witchcraft were on the rise.
Was he right? After all, many people did confess to being witches. Where's the evidence to back up Scott's view?
Exhibit A. An old picture showing how they extracted confessions in those days.
Exhibit B. Statistics. There's not much of it, but what data we have shows that most of the accused were women, most were old, and most were poor.
Exhibit C. Professor James Sharp, a modern historian who studied the economic conditions of Elizabethan England.
Between around about 1500 and around about 1630, the population of England and Wales doubled. And this meant that if you were at the bottom of society, if you were a poor peasant or a labourer, you would have less chances of getting work because there were more people looking for work. This led to increased competition and aggression among villagers, and for richer villagers to often accuse poorer ones of being witches.
So, imagine a village like Newchurch in Pendle in the late Elizabethan period. More people, fewer jobs, food scarce. Once that have looked after the old, the vulnerable. Now the old beg from door to door and mutter when they're turned away. Were old Demdike and Anne Chattox witches? Maybe. We'll never know. But like so many things in history,
It's all a question of interpretation.